Welcome to the 191st episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Larry Millett, author of Strongwood, a mystery novel. Larry is the author of many Sherlock Holmes mystery novels. He's also the former architectural critic for the St. Paul Pioneer Press and the author of several books on the history of architecture in Minnesota. Stay tuned for my interview with Larry Millett. Well, welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Larry Millett, author of Strongwood, a crime dossier, published by the University of Minnesota Press. In addition to Strongwood, Larry has written several Sherlock Holmes novels, including Sherlock Holmes and the Red Demon and Sherlock Holmes and the Ice Palace Murders. Larry has also written several nonfiction books about the Twin Cities, including the AIA Guide to the Twin Cities. Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Great. Well, can you read the first couple of pages of your new novel, Strongwood?
I certainly will. I'll begin with Addie Strongwood's own account of the case in her own words, and that's part of the way the novel works. So here we go. I will begin by stating that I did not murder Michael Masterson in cold blood, as the calumnies of the press would have it, and that I am in every way a woman wronged. If there does indeed abide in this world some measure of justice, a dubious proposition I am beginning to believe, then it is not I who should be standing trial before the people of Hennepin County, but those who in their low viciousness and cruel cunning abetted in the crimes against me. I feel upon me the heavy weight of falsehood, as did the prophet Isaiah. Quote, none calleth for justice, nor any pleadeth for truth. They trust in vanity and speak lies. They conceive mischief and bring forth iniquity, unquote. The truth is that I loved Michael more than the world will ever know. I gave him my heart, which is the greatest thing a woman has to give, and I gave it to him so completely that I will never be able to give it in that way again. Yet instead of love from Michael, I was met only with treachery on that fateful day in room 413 of the Wyndham block. My trial is now but a few weeks away, and while I'm hopeful that the truth in all of its mighty splendor will emerge from the proceedings to come, I have decided to take advantage of the offer made to me by Mr. William J. Murphy of the Minneapolis Tribune to write my own account of the events that led to Michael Masterson's death. My attorney, Mr. J. Winston Phelps, who is well known in this city as a champion of justice, has advised me to remain silent until my day in court arrives. But as I am the only person in a position to tell the truth without prejudice or distortion, I believe that I must go ahead and make my case to the public. Untruths have already been piled upon my good name like dirt slung into a freshly dug grave. I do not propose to let men with shovels bury me in their lies. Of all the falsehoods that have circulated since that day which changed my life forever, none is more loathsome than the claim that I planned Michael's killing like some patient spider weaving its web. Well, it is true that I armed myself before going to the Wyndham block. I did so only for the purpose of defending myself should the need arise. My intent was only to convince Michael to do the right and honorable thing. His response to my heartfelt plea was sudden and brutal, and it was in that moment life or death for me. I chose to defend my life as any man or woman would in such dire circumstances, and had I failed to act, I have no doubt that I would today be among the unremembered dead in the potter's field at Lakewood or some other lonely burial ground. It has been reported by the press since my arrest that I was raised as a street waif and was known, in the words of one especially malicious article in the Journal, to be a wild and unruly girl destined from an early age to a life of immorality and crime. Nothing could be further from the truth. To set the record straight, I will now describe the early years of my life, which were indeed difficult, but hardly as impoverished and unhappy as certain sensation-minded writers would have made them out to be. That's kind of the start of the book and a couple of pages of Addie's statement about what happened and why she claims to have shot Michael Masterson.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about Strongwood, a crime dossier yet, how would you describe the novel?
Well, it's set in Minneapolis in 1903. It has appearances by Sherlock Holmes and also my own detective, Shadwell Rafferty. But basically, it is an attempt to recreate fictionally sort of the kind of pot-boiling book that was often done after spectacular murder cases in the 19th and early 20th century. So it's presented as a dossier style. It includes Addie's own statements about the case as written in the newspapers. It includes newspaper accounts, diaries, letters, all those sorts of things, and direct court testimony, all the sorts of things that you would find in a book of that sort. So it's all presented as a real-life case, even though it's all completely fictional.
Right. And do you remember what initially sparked your idea for Strongwood?
Well, I had been interested. I spent many years as a court reporter for the newspapers here in St. Paul and covered a lot of criminal trials, big criminal trials, some that were quite renowned locally. And I'd always been struck by how much goes on in a trial and how the stories vary so widely, how when you get into the trial format, versions of events become so different from witnesses, and it becomes so difficult to kind of pick out what the truth is. And I thought this would be a fairly straightforward case in the sense that it's not there's no question that Addie shot the guy. The question is, what was her motive? What was her intent? What really happened? Was it murder or self-defense? And that's a very basic kind of a case, hardly, an original plot idea. But I thought presenting it as a documentary style and giving a sense of how, as the case goes on, you learn more and more that brings more and more into question among all the people who are involved. It becomes kind of, I think, a fascinating look at how justice works and how difficult it can be to sort out what really, really happens in a he said, she said situation. That's really the simple basis of the book, is a he said, she said, but once it unfolds and expands, you start seeing how complicated that becomes.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, you've written several Sherlock Holmes novels, and as you mentioned, Sherlock Holmes has an appearance in your new novel. Do you remember when you first encountered or read the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories?
Yeah, I do. Like a lot of people, I had somewhere along, probably when I was about 12, in that range, acquired the very common Doubleday published set of all the stories and novels, the cheap, readily available set of the stories, and just started tearing through them, and found them fascinating. And here I'm a kid sitting in North Minneapolis. What do I know about London? What do I know about Victorian era? What do I know about detectives? And it was all just extremely fascinating to me. I was a great reader as a kid, and I just found the stories wonderful, and went through the whole thing very, very, very quickly, canon, and that's something that sticks with you, even though you forget the details over time. I'd always liked Sherlock Holmes. I'd read some books about Doyle, and I had read some Sherlockian knockoffs over the years, and so I'm one of those people who discovered him fairly early and has always loved the character and the stories. Sure.
And do you have a favorite Holmes story?
Probably my all-time favorite is the Red-Headed League, and that's a famous story. But because of that sort of masterful deception, which has now become a fairly common plot feature, but I think Doyle was just about the first to kind of offer that sort of Shaggy Dog kind of a story, and it really was a revelation to me when I read it, as a kid, like, so that's clever. I see. This was all just a front for something else, and we've seen, that plot device has been used many times before or since, and I think Doyle was kind of the guy who did that first, and I think that's one of the great detective stories in the language, without a doubt.
Sure. Well, when you first read the stories in that Doubleday edition when you were 12 years old, were you aware at all of the Sherlockian kind of pastiche or fan fiction that came out?
No, not at all. Yeah, no, not at all. And that's something like a lot of mystery writers. I went through a phase, when I was a great mystery reader. Actually, I'm not as big a reader anymore because I've got so much other stuff to do. So many architecture books, particularly, that take up a lot of my time now. But I went through a phase when I read tons of mystery novels, and I really got to love the classic English novels, the whodunits. And so, Doyle led me to people like Agatha Christie and Dorothy Sayers and John Dixon Carr and, Ellery Queen and some of those classic people. And that's always been, I read my share of thrillers and that sort of thing as well, but I always liked the kind of classic whodunit. My novel just before this one, called The Magic Bullet, was my paean to John Dixon Carr, a very complex locked room mystery, a literal locked room mystery that I had a lot of fun with, and I'd always wanted to do one. And so I tend to work in those. I like the historic kinds of fiction. All of my books are historically set in the late 19th, early 20th century, because I like that period. I know a lot about the history of that period, so it's fun to set mysteries in and bring in Holmes and other historic characters who will pass through these books.
Sure. And what prompted you, given your as you just mentioned, your interest in those classic mystery authors, starting with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, what prompted you to try your hand at writing a Sherlock Holmes novel?
Well, it's funny because I was working at the Pioneer Press, the newspaper here in St. Paul, in the 1990s, the same time that John Sanford, when John Camp's his real name, but I know him as John Camp, but
Sure.
but he was working there, and lo and behold, I think it was the early 90s that John sold for a lot of money his first Prey book. And everybody kind of got to say, hey, we ought to try that. And so actually, I like everybody else, I sat down and tried to write a thriller, which wasn't all that bad, but it wasn't a John Sanford quality thriller. And I figured out sometimes you have to, the only way you can figure out what to do is by, first of all, trying what not to do. And I realized when I talked to John and kind of took the book apart and looked at it, that it was actually more of a mystery novel than a thriller.
Sure.
And it was kind of in between the genres, and it's hard to get a book published unless you're a really famous author that's kind of in between the genre. You have to kind of stick to what is. So I thought, with my love of history and all of that maybe it made more sense for me to go into the historic format, because I'd written a lot of history books, and that worked out much better for me. I felt much more natural in that format than I did trying to write a thriller. So it was kind of, John was one of the inspirations. We had a whole group of writers at the Pioneer Press who ended up writing mystery fiction. Chuck Logan, Terry Monsoor, Karen Nelson Douglas. Just a group of people that came out of there that were talented writers. And so that also, being in that environment, I think got me going. And I managed to get Viking Penguin was the publisher of the first 5 Sherlock, so I got a national publisher and had some success with the books, but nothing like John's success. So
Sure. Well, over the years, and obviously recently with the CBS show of
the Sherlock,
the Sherlock show. Are there any recent Sherlock novels or other media that you've liked or paid attention to?
Well, I don't get to most of the Sherlocks, the novels, simply because there's so many of them. I went back to Nicholas Myers and the 7% Solution and some classic books like that. I do like the new British masterpiece series, the Holmes, the very in which they riff on real Conan Doyle stories, but they update them, change plot elements, give them a slightly different title, and I think that new Sherlock is a lot of fun. I don't know if you've seen it, the one that PBS shows, but it's really well made. Very complicated plots, and everybody talks way too fast. But beyond that, they've done a lot of fun things with, they've sort of taken Sherlock and kind of pushed him out to the edge of being just about crazy, and had a lot of fun with his ability to read a person's face and their apparel and all that, and it's kind of over the top, but it's fun, and I think Sherlock should be fun.
Sure,
and he's
sure.
a wonderful character, but you got to have some fun with it, and that's why we enjoy the story so much. It's just kind of fun watching him operate, and so I do like that a lot. And the TV show, which title I can't remember, is okay. I'm not as fond of that as I am of the British series.
Sure, sure. Well, I'm curious, have you followed the recent legal rulings about the copyright issues about
Yeah, a little
Sherlock?
bit. Yeah, and it's still a bit fuzzy to me, but in this country, it's less of a problem than it is in England in terms of, I think, with the copyright issues, and it's gotten kind of, it's always been a tangled issue. But through the years, the lawyers at Viking Penguin, said, we don't have any problem with you using the character, but yeah, it may be getting more difficult depending upon how all this gets interpreted in the United States. But
Right.
yeah, and that's hard to say. And there'll be, I think, continued dispute about that. But the thing is, the character has been, appropriated for a long, long, long time. The image of Sherlock that we all have in our mind with the meerschaum pipe and all of that's really from stage plays that were done in the 19th and early 20th century by William Gillette, and he didn't have any permission to do that. He just went and did it, and a lot of people did, and even today, I mean, there are just so many pastiches out there, and the character remains so popular, and it ebbs and flows. And right now, I think we're in kind of a high period for Sherlock. It'll tamp down after a while, but then it'll pick up again. He's definitely one of the immortal characters in our literature.
Sure. Sure. Well, you mentioned earlier that you worked at the Pioneer Press.
Yeah.
Had you always wanted to be a writer? What was kind of your path to journalism in the Pioneer Press?
Well, yeah, I had, and I'm basically, a college English major, studied literature. I have a master's degree in English literature, which I don't necessarily recommend for anybody, but I have one. And so I had always thought about being a writer, but I hadn't really. I thought, well, maybe I'll be, a serious novelist or something like that. And I sort of fell into journalism. I never took a journalism course, but after I got out I spent a year in graduate school, and I didn't really like it at all. And I said, I'm done with this. I can't take this anymore. And so I fell into journalism, and then gradually also fell into writing about architecture and design, and then the novels became kind of my second career after I had written a number of architecture books, and I've kind of gone back and forth. I'm kind of unusual. I'm just preparing a new website, which should be up in a month or so, and it's divided into just two sections: history and mystery.
Yeah.
And and the history and the mystery connect in various ways, but there's like two really separate bodies of work, and I go back and forth, typically in kind of blocks. I wrote the first 5 Sherlocks, I think, in 6 years. And then I went back to writing architecture for 10 years. It was 10 years between, I think, my 5th novel and my 6th. And then Strongwood, I just kind of sneaked in here. I've got another big architecture book coming out in the fall, and another one in 2015 that's just eating up all my time. So I'm trying to decide at this point whether, and once I get done with the second architecture book, if I want to stay with that or devote more time to mystery writing in my declining years, because I'm not getting any younger. And
so
I don't know.
So tell me about the 2 nonfiction books. You said one's coming out.
Oh yeah, one is
a
a book on great Minnesota houses, a very lavish coffee table book that is financed by a foundation in Wisconsin that did a beautiful book on Wisconsin homes, and so they're doing one on Minnesota, and so it'll be a lovely book with wonderful new color images of great houses, and people people love house books.
Sure.
And then the second one, however, is completely different. It's on mid-century modernism, and so it's about the 50s and about the architecture and the houses of the 50s, which are becoming, as all things do come back, very popular with the 30-somethings. and people are buying mid-century houses and saying, "Ooh, these are cool,"
I'll be honest. I mean, my knowledge of architecture
you're not an architect.
is very slim. But what would that style be referred to? Or
well, it's basically what we think of. If you think of kind of the modern, open, flowing house, the kind of houses, the big ramblers from the 50s, the flat roof, big windowed, open plan houses. That's that style, and the sort of a lot of interesting churches were done, modernist churches. I went to school at St. John's University, and they have a world famous mid-century church there by Marcel Breuer, a Hungarian architect who also did the Whitney Museum in New York, among other things. A world-class architect, and did this fabulous mid-century church that's one of a kind. And so it's modernism, but sort of the earlier phase of modernism in this country, and it's become very fashionable. The houses in particular, people are, especially the high-style architect design houses, people who are tired of all the neo-Victorian stuff and, are looking at these houses and saying, hey, they're kind of cool, and you get the right furniture in them, they can be very nice. So I'll be doing a book on that. It's, and for anybody who grew up in the 50s, as I did, we all went to those 50s schools, those big brick schools with the one floor plan and the big high schools, all that stuff, if you're my age, I'm 66, anybody who grew up in the 50s or lived in the 50s, we tend to think of all that stuff as just sort of all as being there now, but it really was a complete departure from what kind of architecture we had before in schools and churches and everything else. So it's for your architecture and design buffs, but I'll have a little fun with it too. I always try to have a little fun with my architecture books. And
how did you get interested and how did you start writing about architecture in the Twin Cities?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect, but then I sort of decided later in life that maybe that's not for me, and so I ended up as an English major, and then. I always tell people what you're interested in when you're 12 years old is what you're going to be interested in when you're 50 years old in the long run. And my interest kind of came back to bite me, and I wrote my first book about architecture in 1985, a little book about a famous bank building in Minnesota designed by the great Chicago architect Louis Sullivan. And so I got into sort of the whole prairie school, Frank Lloyd Wright thing particularly is my main area of interest and expertise, and that's some very Midwestern-based style, modern style. So kind of got into that and was just interested in it. And why? Who knows? Why? I never know why people are interested in things at all. It's one of the most amazing things about life to me is the different things that people out of the blue are interested in, and you never quite figure out why.
Sure.
Yeah. So.
Well,
so I know that was my little sideline, and so I've written quite a few books on architecture, and they're very popular books locally. I have one that's been in print now for 23 or 24 years, and it's up over 25,000 copies. It's a $50 book.
Wow. I know from doing research for this interview that you wrote a nonfiction book, The Lost Twin Cities, which you referred
that's the one that's been
your...
around forever. Yeah, and that'll probably be in print forever. That's just kind of a local classic. But
so what's that book about? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. It's a book about buildings and places in Minneapolis and St. Paul are gone. Like most American cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul have destroyed zillions of buildings, and some of them very, very wonderful buildings over the years, and particularly in their downtowns. And so, there have been books called Lost New York and Lost Chicago, and whatever. And so it's kind of in that mode. But looking for people who are from a particular city, it can be fascinating to go back and say, "Wow, look at this stuff that isn't here anymore." So it's kind of a little trip in nostalgia, but also for a lot of people. Just aren't aware how rich the architectural environments in American cities were at one time, and how much in many cases has been lost to everything you can think of over the years, but often just pointless destruction.
Sure. Well,
and I also did a book I don't know if you've seen this one, but it's actually my favorite book, called Strange Days, Dangerous Nights, which is about speed graphic photography, newspaper photography in the 1950s, and has this book. See if you can run across it somewhere. It has some just absolutely amazing black and white Ouija-style photographs from St. Paul, Minneapolis. The kind of gory coverage that newspapers did in the 50s is just amazing. What they would put in the paper compared to what you see today. It was much wilder, much bloodier, much more graphic. And I did a book on just looking at picking some photographs out from the Pioneer Press library, essentially, and man, oh man, the stuff is incredible. And so that was a lot of fun. So I've done some books like that as well, too, but mostly either architecture or mystery are my two. Architecture, history, and mystery are my two rather odd combined things.
Well, with your knowledge of the Twin Cities, I know this might be a tough question to answer, but I'm curious if someone had not visited the city before and only had like a day or two to spend there, what should be on their list of places to visit?
Well, I think for the two cities, if you're going to Minneapolis, the riverfront is fascinating, that they've now developed around the old milling district at St. Anthony Falls. Minneapolis exists because of big waterfall in the Mississippi River, the only waterfall in Mississippi. And that's what turned the city into a giant center of flour milling, the biggest flour milling city in the world for half a century. And the history of that milling and the waterfall and the historic buildings and mills all around there is just really incredible. Also, the Guthrie Theater is down there now. And it's really the heart of Minneapolis and a very cool place to see. You go over to St. Paul, which you should too. Probably the highlight of St. Paul is what's called Summit Avenue, which is the big street of mansions near which F. Scott Fitzgerald grew up. I live about a mile and a half from where F. Scott Fitzgerald was born. And where Garrison Keillor, by the way, now lives in one of the Summit Avenue mansions. And great stretch of Victorian mansions, one of the best preserved Victorian residential streets in the United States, probably in the top 3 or 4. And also the giant St. Paul Cathedral, which is one of the largest churches in the United States, kicks off Summit Avenue. So that's a great place, especially, Twin Cities are especially lovely in summer, which lasts about 2 months. And, we're still struggling here to get out of the 60s, but for visitors who come during high season, June, July, August, September, those are the two things I would recommend. Get over, see the Minneapolis riverfront, enjoy some of the culture over there. Come over to St. Paul, see Summit Avenue, take a little walking or biking trip and look at all the mansions. You can tour some of the big mansions, including James J. Hill's mansion, where my first Sherlock Holmes novel was set, began in the James J. Hill mansion. Sherlock Holmes and the Red Demon. Hill is the one who hires Holmes for that case, and that mansion, which is enormous, is open to the public and definitely worth seeing.
That's great. Well, given your career, what advice would you have for aspiring writers who would like to?
The basics. If you want to be a writer, you got to be a reader first, and then I would say, if you're really interested in doing something, try to choose wisely in terms of where you think your strengths would be, in terms of format, whether it's essay, serious fiction, poetry, mystery fiction, whatever your type of writing. Kind of figure out first what it is that you think you could be best at doing, and that would give you the most pleasure and satisfaction. And then you have to go out and write. I mean, if you're want to be a mystery novelist, you have to write a mystery novel, even if it's not going to get published. And even people like John Sanford have unpublished mystery novels. I've got 2-3 of them sitting around, because that's the other way you learn is just by doing. Try to find some good other writers to critique. Try to develop your own strengths. Grow a style, and I think it takes a while for most people for that to come fully out, and just devote a lot of time to the craft. I mean, it's people, I think, put too much emphasis on inspiration. That's fine, and there are people who are dazzlingly inspired and with dazzling imaginations, but a lot of it is just a discipline. I mean, a craft and a discipline, and if you're especially if you're interested in writing a great American novel, and inspiration and imagination and brilliance and all that, those are things that you can't practice or learn. Some people just have them, but you can practice and learn how to be a better writer of any kind, and you can certainly practice and learn how to be a good mystery writer. And the other thing I would say, if you want to write historic mystery fiction, for example, then read a lot of it first. Get a sense of how better writers have done it, what they do, what some of the techniques are, what some of the approaches are, and that's a good way to do it. And then just go out and do it. Block your time, figure out a way to do it. I wrote my first novels. All my first novels, I was also working, full time as a journalist. So it was something I could only do when I was young. You can't do it when you're older. You just don't have the amount of energy. But yeah, you really have to spend some time at it. And then getting published in this day and age in mystery novel is really tough. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff out there. I know some very good mystery writers, even locally here, who are just not finding publishers anymore and are doing online books and everything else because it's so tough, and it's really a tough field to make money in now, because the mid list has kind of gone away, and so it's kind of you've got the really people like John who are way up in the stratosphere and earning enormous amounts of money, and I have no objections at all, because he's John's just really, really good. He deserves it, but it's tough to break into that level. There's only a few people that do, and so most writers, if your dream is of making a fortune, think again. You have to do it because you want to do it, and you like it, and then try to maneuver your way and get a publisher. For a lot of writers, I think you're probably better off, for a first book, trying to get a regional publisher or a local publisher rather than hoping you can get something nationally. But some people do. Every year somebody breaks through with a big successful book, so it can still be done. But it's a long odds game, Sure. And I think most people who are, say they're in their 20s and think about becoming a writer or trying to break into a particular genre, they know that it's a tough thing to do. But if you got the talent and you find the right book, I wish I would have thought of that Harry Potter thing. I'd spend more time in Florida in the winter had I thought of the Harry Potter thing.
Yeah.
But it's a struggle. It's a lot of work. It's never easy, but you can build a career over it. But it helps helps to have a paying job, at least while you're trying to establish yourself. And sure. It's like anything else. It's but yeah, people do it, and I've been at it for a long time, and I made no fortune at it, but I've enjoyed it, and it's what I do. So
great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Larry Millett, author of many nonfiction books about the Twin Cities, including the AIA Guide to the Twin Cities and Once There Were Castles, Lost Mansions, and Estates of the Twin Cities. Larry's latest novel, Smartwood, A Crime Dossier.
Strongwood.
Sorry, Strongwood.
Yeah,
A Crime Dossier is in bookstores now, so grab a copy. Larry, thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you.
Great.
The stockings are hung and the shopping has begun. This holiday season, shop Cincinnati favorite gift cards at Kroger. Grab a gift card to La Rosa's and enjoy a warm slice of pizza. Or snag a gift card to Grater's and treat yourself to something sweet. Whoever you're shopping for, you'll earn 4 times fuel points on Cincinnati favorite gift cards. Head over to giftcards.kroger.com/Cincinnati-favorites to complete your shopping list and support our local businesses. Available in Cincinnati, Columbus, and Louisville markets only. Restrictions apply. See website for details.